Exodus 2 Bible Study Script, KJV. The Birth of Moses and God's Hidden Providence. Introduction. Today we will study Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 25 from the King James Version of the Bible. This chapter introduces one of the most important figures in the entire Bible, Moses, the man, whom God would later use to deliver the people of Israel from Egypt. However, before Moses became the great leader of Israel, he was first a helpless baby, born during a time of terrible oppression. In the previous chapter, in Exodus 1, the Israelites had multiplied greatly in the land of Egypt. A new Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph, and he feared the growing number of Hebrews. Because of this fear, Pharaoh enslaved the Israelites and ordered that every Hebrew, male child, be killed. This was a dark moment in Israel's history. Yet in the middle of oppression, suffering, and fear, God was already preparing his plan of salvation. Exodus chapter 2 reveals how God works quietly behind the scenes, guiding history, according to his sovereign will. Historical background. The events of Exodus likely take place around the 15th to 13th century BC. At this time, Egypt was one of the most powerful empires in the ancient world. Pharaoh was not merely a king, he was considered a divine ruler. The Israelites had originally come to Egypt during the time of Joseph, when famine struck the land of Canaan. But after several generations, the Egyptians forgot Joseph's contributions and began to see the Israelites as a threat. As a result, the Israelites were enslaved and forced to build cities for Pharaoh. It was during this time of oppression that Moses was born. Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. The birth and rescue of Moses. The chapter begins with a Levite couple. A man from the tribe of Levi married a woman from the same tribe. This couple would later be known as Amram and Jochebed, the parents of Moses. When their son was born, the mother saw that the child was beautiful. The Hebrew expression used here suggests something more than physical beauty. It implies that the child was marked by God's purpose. For 3 months, the mother hid the baby from the Egyptian authorities. But eventually it became impossible to hide him any longer. So she made a small basket, made of papyrus reeds, and coated it with pitch and slime to make it waterproof. The Hebrew word for this basket is teva. Interestingly, this is the same word used for Noah's Ark in Genesis. Just as Noah's Ark preserved life during the flood, this small ark preserved the life of Moses. She placed the child inside the basket and set it among the reeds by the Nile River. Nearby, Moses' sister, likely Miriam, stood at a distance to watch what would happen. Soon, Pharaoh's daughter came to the river to bathe. She saw the basket among the reeds and had it brought to her. When she opened it, she saw the crying baby. Even though she immediately recognized that the child was Hebrew, her heart was moved with compassion. This moment is one of the most remarkable demonstrations of God's providence. The same royal household that had ordered the death of Hebrew boys would now raise the very man who would one day challenge Pharaoh. Miriam then approached Pharaoh's daughter and offered to find a Hebrew nurse to care for the baby. Pharaoh's daughter agreed. And who did Miriam bring? The baby's own mother. This means that Moses' mother was actually paid by Pharaoh's daughter to nurse and raise her own son. This is one of the most beautiful examples of how God can turn oppression into blessing. Eventually, the child grew, and he was brought to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. She named him Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." The name Moses reflects both Egyptian and Hebrew linguistic roots. Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 15. Moses defends his people. As Moses grew older, he became aware of his Hebrew identity. Even though he had been raised in the palace of Pharaoh, he knew he belonged to the people of Israel. One day he went out to observe the suffering of his people. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Looking around and seeing no one nearby, Moses killed the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. The next day, he encountered 2 Hebrews fighting with each other. When Moses tried to intervene, one of them said, "Who made thee a prince and a judge over us?" Then Moses realized that his action had become known. Soon, Pharaoh heard about the incident and sought to kill Moses. So Moses fled from Egypt and went into the land of Midian. Here we see an important spiritual lesson. Moses had the right heart. He cared about the suffering of his people. But he acted in his own strength, not in God's timing. God still had many years of preparation ahead for Moses. Exodus 2:16-22. Moses in Midian. In the land of Midian, Moses came to a well. 7 daughters of a priest named Jethro, also called Reuel, came to draw water for their father's flock. but some shepherds drove them away. Moses defended the women and helped them water the flock. When they returned home earlier than usual, their father asked why. They explained that an Egyptian had helped them. Jethro invited Moses to stay. Eventually, Moses married one of his daughters, Zipporah. They had a son named Gershom, meaning, "I have been a stranger in a strange land." For 40 years, Moses would live as a shepherd in Midian. This was God's training ground. Before leading a nation through the wilderness, Moses had to first learn how to guide sheep in the desert. Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 through 25. God hears the cry of Israel. The chapter ends with a powerful moment. The king of Egypt died. But the suffering of the Israelites continued. The people of Israel groaned because of their slavery. They cried out to God. The Bible says something very important. God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant. God looked upon the children of Israel, and God knew. This does not mean that God had forgotten before. Rather, it means that God was now about to act. According to his covenant promises, he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Deliverance was coming. And God had already prepared the man who would lead that deliverance, Moses. Spiritual lessons. There are several powerful spiritual lessons in this chapter. First, God works behind the scenes. Even when his people suffer, God is preparing his plan. Second, God's timing is different from ours. Moses tried to act at age 40, but God would not use him until age 80. Third, God often prepares leaders through hidden seasons. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before beginning his ministry. Fourth, God hears the cries of his people. When we feel forgotten or oppressed, God still sees and remembers his promises. Application for today. Even today, many people feel like they are living in spiritual Egypt. They face suffering, uncertainty, and waiting. But Exodus chapter 2 reminds us that God is never absent from our story. Even when we cannot see his hand, he is guiding events toward his purpose. Sometimes the season of waiting is actually the season of preparation. God was shaping Moses into the leader Israel would need. In the same way, God shapes our character before he reveals our calling. If you feel like you are in a hidden place today, remember this truth. God is still working. Your story is not finished. Just as God prepared Moses, he is preparing his people even now. Thank you.